I have to admit, I'm kind of late to this party. I know that all of you guys are familiar with the leather wrap bracelet trend. It's actually been going on for quite a while now, and there are definitely other videos out there, but I wanted to show you my take on the leather wrap bracelet, and mainly because I kind of wanted to make one for myself. And if I make a video on it, it's a big excuse for me to make one for myself. And look what I'm wearing, a super cute little leather wrap bracelet. This particular one that I did, I used delicas and did a little pattern in it. And so it is kind of a small scale. I also did it only as a single strand bracelet. You certainly can do the multi-wrap ones. I just did a small one as I was working out the techniques and that kind of thing. And of course, we're going to make a Barbie one today. But the first thing that I want to talk to you about is all the supplies that you need, because they're different than our usual bead weaving kind of supplies, but it's probably stuff that you have around, and if not, I want to kind of cover what you need. So let me kind of bring you down here to the hand cam. So these are kind of the general supplies. And oh, I also wanted to give you a nice close-up look of the bracelet here. And of course it's purples. And then here is the closure. So I'm using the purple leather, and this is a random button that I had, and here's how the closure works. So you've got this, the double knot for your closure, and then over here. And I will tell you that actually, as I've been wearing this today, this knot under here, I kind of just put there because it was decorative. What ends up happening when I'm wearing this is, let me show you, that this knot and this knot kind of want to fight a little bit. And so as we make ours today in the video, with the video, I'm not going to include that knot. We're just going to start with thread right there so that that is a more clean start. Okay, so I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're looking at. Now this is obviously only one of many, many different variations of a leather wrap bracelet that you can do, but I hadn't seen anybody else do it with the little delicas before, and that is right up my alley, isn't it? Okay, so let's talk about the materials. So the first thing that you're going to need is leather. And what I like to use, this is a 1.5 millimeter Greek leather. And you can also use a 2 millimeter leather. I really like this Greek leather, and the reason is I can trust that this coating on it will not come off. If you have access to Indian leather, some of the Indian leather is good quality, and specifically Tandy. If it's Tandy brand, it's probably a good quality Indian leather where you can trust the coating. What you want to look for, though, if you're shopping somewhere for leather and you don't even know what kind of leather it is you want to look to make sure that there's no bubbles in the color as you look along here. And if you can, right on the end of the leather here, you can kind of take your fingers and kind of just scrape it a little bit and make sure that that coating doesn't come off really easily. I will tell you that I learned this from harsh experience. I had actually ordered a bunch of Indian leather to sell on the website, and when it came in, it was so poor quality. Like if I did that, the entire sleeve of coloring would come off, and it was bubbled all over the place. So I actually ended up throwing it out because it was just such bad quality. Okay, so you want leather, 1.5 mil, 2 mil will be a little bit bulkier. You need just a little piece of scrap, something. This is an optional piece, and I will explain this later. I'm using some rat tail that I had, so that will work. You're going to need a button for your closure, and you want to take into account how wide your the bracelet part is going to be. So if it's a wider piece, say instead of using 3 delicas wide, let's say I did 10 delicas wide and it was a much wider piece, I might want what am I trying to say? This is a button that's more this size, but because this is kind of a delicate piece, I wanted a smaller size button. Let me tell you about the buttons. These buttons all have holes that are big enough that this leather will go through, but not all buttons will. So I can connect these buttons very easily. In this particular one that I used on that piece, you can actually see that the button holes themselves are right here, and my leather won't go through them, but that just happens to have this beautiful decorated section right here, and that's actually what I used for attaching my leather, was these little decorative holes because they were a little bit bigger. Something like this is kind of fun because it's just got that bar there, so you'll just go up and down the bar. And then if you've got a button with a shank, so here, this has a shank on it. And again, some shank holes are big enough for that leather to go through. Some are not. I had quite a few decorative buttons that did not have a shank big enough for the leather to go through. And what you could still use them. What you would have to do is attach a double wire wrapped loop on a shank to use it. And then you would actually bring your leather through the wire wrapped loop instead. And I will have a separate video in the future on how to do that, to adapt it. Okay, so these are just a couple of buttons that I had in my own personal collection. I have a lot of buttons, gorgeous tiara cast buttons that I will have available on my website, and they all have holes big enough to accommodate the leather. Okay, so leather, buttons, some cord. You're of course going to want a tape measure because we're going to need to do some measuring. Glue is kind of optional on this. We are going to do some knotting of thread on your leather, but because the thread is so small, we're going to do a couple of square knots on top of each other, and honestly, I think that is probably secure enough. If you are worried about it though, you certainly can use some kind of glue, just dab it on those knots. In this case, I particularly like this one. It's a super glue, and I like it because it's easy to control. Hypo cement would be another good one for you to use. Okay, you'll need some kind of needle. So I'm going to use just regular beading needles, but if you have trouble using regular beading needles, you can always use a big eye needle or one of the collapsible needles. You're going to need some kind of thread, and it's up to you whether you want your thread to match your leather or be a contrast to your leather. In this case, this ended up matching my leather, and I actually would have probably preferred it because I actually really like the look of the thread against the leather, and I would have preferred it to have a different color, and I don't know why I made that choice last night. So anyway, so this is actually Hannah thread. This is a new kind of thread that we just started carrying at Jill Wiseman Designs, and I did want to use this brand because I wanted to test it out, and I like it quite a bit. Little bit of beeswax. I do think that beeswax is better for this particular project or microcrystalline wax. You do not want to use Thread Heaven. The point of using the beeswax on your thread is that it makes it a little stickier and it will hold better on your leather so that your stuff doesn't slide around quite as much. And then of course you're going to need beads. And so in this case, these were the 4 colors of beads that I used. I happened to be using them on a different project and they were sitting on my desk, and I love these colors together. So that's what I used. And then you will need a pair of scissors. So I'm using my trusty Xeron cutters that cut everything, and they certainly will cut this leather because the leather is not super stiff or anything. So this is good enough to cut both the thread and the leather. And then one last thing, and this is kind of you kind of need to make the project stationary as you're working on it. So you've got a couple of options. If you've got a macrame board, we can work with that. If you've got something like this is the tray that I'm going to be using. It's about a 1/2 inch deep tray, and these are usually called jewelry trays, and you'll frequently see like a velvet pad inside, and some people will work in these trays. I used to, until I discovered my bead on it boards. And then some people, you'll display jewelry on the velvet pads in these trays and that kind of thing. They're very useful. So I'm going to use the little size since I'm making a bracelet. They also come in the great big size. And I do not carry these because shipping can be a little bit difficult with it. So there are definitely places on the internet that you can buy these if your local bead store doesn't carry them. If you have a jewelry supply store in your area, they will have these. And so what I will do is I will put down in the description in the video, I will put down there a link or two of places that you can obtain these if you want to use these. But I will also show you how to use like a macrame board. And honestly, in lieu of this, you could even use like a cookie sheet. So same kind of concept. The benefit of using this is that it will lay across, the project is going to lay across the top edge here, and you're able to get in underneath. It gives you kind of this elevated space. And I'm going to show you how to create that elevated space with your macrame board or even your bead on it board. So when we come back, I'm going to talk about how you're going to get all of this set up, and we'll get started. All right, so how are we going to make this thing? Well, we're going to start out with your leather, and you're going to measure your leather. And what you want to do is you need to make a decision about whether you're going to make a multi-wrap bracelet or a single wrap bracelet, that kind of thing. But basically what I do is I take the end of the leather and I kind of hold it in my hand, and you can just wrap it around your wrist. So if I'm only going to make a single wrap, then I really only need to wrap it around here once. This gives me extra right here, this piece that I was holding in my hand, so like that, and then I'm going to double it because I need the two sides, right? So if I'm going to make a single wrap bracelet, that's all I need right there, and I can cut that. Now, if you want to make a multiple wrap bracelet, same thing. I hold it in my thumb here, and then I wrap it loosely around however many times I want my bracelet to wrap. So let's say I want to make a 3-time wrap, and then I want to kind of bring it up. And then again, we're going to need double. So in this case, you can tell I'm planning on making a Barbie bracelet because I already cut this leather, and so this piece of leather would be too short. I would need it all to extend all the way down to this second end here to make a 3-around wrap bracelet. The leather comes in, I think it's either 5 or 10 yards. I don't remember exactly, but we have the leather available for you at JillWisemanDesigns.com, and it's plenty to make more than one project. So just so you know, but that's how you're going to measure. You don't want to measure too short because you can't add leather later. And the reason you want that extra is because, first of all, we're going to need to attach it to your button, but also we're going to need this extra back here for the knots and to attach your closure. In this case, I only made one closure loop here. If you want to make a piece that's adjustable, you can actually make multiple knots here so that it can fit different size wrists, which is important, especially if you're actually going to sell your pieces. So my rule of thumb is you always kind of want to cut on the long side, especially for your first time. Once you kind of know you've made your first bracelet, you've seen how much you've cut off at the end, then you can kind of cut back and you can keep some notes about, okay, I need exactly, 32 inches or whatever it is, okay? So for your first one, just don't cut it too short. Now I'm going to make a Barbie bracelet, not surprising, right? So I'm just going to cut about this much. We're just going to kind of randomly pick a size here, like so. And I'll put the rest of this off to the side. So now I've got the leather cut, and the first thing to do after that is I want to center it on my button. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to feed it through, and I'm looking at it to make sure that it's like roughly half here. Well, not roughly, I really kind of want it pretty exact. And then we'll feed the other side in over here. And, I did it on the back side. You don't want to do that. So that means I need to take this one and feed it in. I actually forgot that this was not a double-sided button. Okay, so as I feed that in, I kind of want to check to make sure these ends are pretty close together and make any adjustments that I need to. All right, so now they are together like this. The other thing that I'm going to do, because I want to attach this to this beading tray, is I'm going to actually tie just a temporary overhand knot here at the bottom. Later on, we're going to take this apart, so don't go crazy with your knotting skills, okay? This is temporary. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is this is where the extra just scrap cord comes in, and you can use anything. The reason I like to use the rat tail is because it's easy to untie. So because I'm not going to, on my original one, I had tied that knot underneath the bracelet here to hold these cords together, and then I ran the scrap through that hole underneath. I don't want to tie that knot this time. So what I'm going to do to run that scrap through is I'm actually going to run it on the top of the button right up underneath that loop, like so. So I'm temporarily grabbing onto this. And so we're going to put this on this board, and then I'm going to flip the board over, and on this side, as I'm doing this, I'm making sure that the button is, basically I just don't want the button to be way off the side here. I want it to be, because this is the area I'm going to be working in, and I want this to be in an area where I can get to it. So then over here, I am taking one end of this scrap, and this is why I tied this temporary knot over here, is so that I can run this one end of the scrap through there and one end on the outside, and then this is where I'm going to tighten all this down, and I'm going to tie this knot so that this will all hold now on this board, like so. And this can be moved, so it can be tightened or loosened, and as I need to, I can loosen that up a little bit and kind of move this off. But this is a really nice way of securing all of this so that I am able to work here. And I have the space underneath where I can kind of manipulate down under here. So that's why I really like using these trays. Now, let's say you don't have one of these trays at home with you. Same thing, you can use the lip of a cookie sheet will work just the same way. You just might have to have a longer piece of scrap cord. The way you would use it on something flat like on this, a bead on it board has a little bit of a lip to it, so you might be able to use the bead on it board. But if you need to raise the legs of your cords here, you can actually slip something like a spool of thread underneath there to raise it. So for instance, if you have a macrame board and you're securing it to something flat, what you can do on this end is just when you go to secure it over something like a spool of thread or something to elevate it, and then you'll still be able to have that space underneath there so that you can manipulate and get in underneath. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is get our thread tied on. And here is the thread. I've actually already cut myself a piece of thread here. This is that Hannah thread, and I'm using it doubled because I wanted a double thickness going across the leather. I like the doubled. If you prefer a singled, you can certainly use a single length of thread instead of the doubled. And then I centered my needle on the two threads, and I've already just tied just a simple overhand knot here. Now we need to secure it to actually the leather here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just taking the tail end, and we're going to tie it right underneath this button. And so we want to give ourselves a little bit to play with here. And I'm going to tie a square knot. So that means you're going to do, in this case I started with left over right, and just tighten in, and you can see where I want it to be able to come to a V underneath. So I can't get it super tight under the button, but quite a bit. And then this time I'm going to take, right over left and do that and tighten on down like so. And then I'm actually going to do this one more time. So I did left over right first. Usually I do right over left first. I don't know why I'm doing it opposite. Is it opposites day somewhere? And then right over left. So that's two square knots, and that's nice and secure. But notice how it's kind of moving around on us. That's okay, because here's what we're going to do. We're going to just leave this tail here, and we're not going to worry about it right now. What I do like to do, just because this helps secure it all a little bit, is we're going to do some figure 8 back and forth with these 2 pieces of leather and your thread. So all that means is right now my thread is coming across the top of this piece of leather on the right. So I'm going to go under the piece on the right and then over on the left, okay, which is where it is now, then under on the left and over on the right. So we're just weaving it back and forth, and then as I do this, I'm just kind of tightening it up kind of to where I want it to be. And then I'm just going to keep going back and forth a couple of times. It just creates a nice little wrap. It's a kind of an elegant start to everything. And then if you want to glue, this also kind of gives you another little spot to glue. But it also means that you don't have to glue because, again, this is really well secured in here as you're doing this. Okay, I'm going to do one more. Get us back over to the right side here. All right. So now I feel really good about where that wrap is. It's very well secured. It's not moving around on us anymore since we did the figure 8s, and we are about ready to start adding beads. But let's take a break and let's let you get to the spot too, and we'll start adding beads when we come back. All right, so let's add some beads. Now you have about a million billion options about what kind of beads you're adding. I, like I said, chose to do a delica kind of pattern. I did a very simple pattern. I will have kits and patterns available for some additional, more intricate kind of patterns that you can make in these wrap bracelets. But you're certainly not limited to something as small as a delica. You can use seed beads, you can use fire polish, you can use crystals, you can use tile beads. We recently got in some mini tile beads, so instead of being 6 millimeters by 6 millimeters, they're 5 millimeters by 5 millimeters. I can't wait to use them in one of these wrap bracelets. One of the things I see a lot of is, as people are making them, is they'll do segments. So they'll do, 3 inches of tile beads and then 3 inches of, say, the delicas section, and then they'll do 3 inches of fire polish. And you can really mix it up and make a very eclectic look. So the techniques that I'm showing you for adding beads are the same no matter what kind of beads you add. And that's why I want to mention it. The only thing that's going to be different is the spacing between the beads and how much thread will show on the outside edges. Because the delicas are really narrow, there's a lot of that additional thread because there's so many rows of the delicas. But if you're using something like the fire polish beads, the space between the thread on that leather is going to be much bigger. And it's fine. Either way, it totally doesn't matter. So let's show you how I'm adding my beads here. Okay, so you're going to notice that I flipped my tray around. I just find it easier to work away from myself than down towards myself. Part of the reason is when I am going to be taking my needle through the beads, if I have my tray flipped around this way, I'm doing the needle through the beads with my right hand. And I just found that more comfortable than trying to do that with my left hand. So that's why I flipped this around. And the other thing that I wanted to show you here is that you do want to taper up to the size that your bracelet is going to be. So I started out here with a single delica for my first row, and then I did 2, and then I got up to the 3, and I did 3 all the way across until I got to the opposite end, and then I tapered down again. That is going to be true whether you do fire polish or any other kind of beads. You're probably going to want to do a taper. So just so you know that you want some kind of taper bead to work with. So that means we have to start with a single seed bead, a single delica. And in my original bracelet here, Barbie wants hers to be just like mine. I used all silver for the taper. So I'm going to pick up that silver delica, and so my thread is on this side, and it's coming over the leather. So that means I need to come under, and under is actually where I want that bead to sit. So I will bring it down. Your first bead is definitely going to be your hardest. I'm kind of poking it into the space between the two pieces of leather here, and you can kind of do this and spread it a little bit to help create that space. Okay, so I'm kind of poking it in there, and then this thread is now coming over the top of your right hand piece of leather. So I'm going to bring it back under, and now is when I'm going to pass back through that delicate. Now here's something that I started doing automatically, and I want to tell you about it because I find this incredibly helpful. So you'll notice I brought that needle underneath this right hand cord, and then what I do is I take that thread and I pull it down towards myself, and what that does is it helps kind of sit the beads that you're adding. It's almost like a shuttle if you were weaving. It's kind of pulling it in towards yourself, and that's how I was able to get those rows of beads nice and very very little space in between them, is because I took this thread and I kind of used it to pull down. All right, so then I'm going to pass back through the delica there, that single delica, like so. So like I said, I've just found it easier to be able to do that with my dominant hand. And then I'm pulling all the cord, all the thread through. And then the other thing that I do every time is I stop and I tighten both of these threads, because what I found is, let me kind of show you on this piece. I don't know if it's a pretty dainty thing to see. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. I think it's worse up here because this is where I started. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of loop of thread around the cord where it could have been tighter. So I actually stop after adding each bead and I pull to make sure that the loops are not too much on either side of the leather, that it's nice and tight and taut there. Okay, so that leaves me up on top of the left again. So that means we are in perfect position to add our next set of beads, and this time we're going to taper up to 2 of our silver. I always do this. I pick up the beads before I kind of go under. So go under first. This will make your life easier. Then pick up the beads, because we want them to sit in between there. Then you kind of force them into position as best you can. You bring this thread under the right, so you're looping it under, using this as kind of a shuttle, kind of pull it down. This is so useful to kind of pull it down, and then pass your needle through those 2 beads. And you've just woven them in. Okay. And I'm kind of just trying to make sure that it's not kind of popping up. We can always move this around a little bit later. So I just don't want it to be too crazy far away from the originals. As we get to the 3 across, it'll be much better. So here I got myself in position. I went under this cord. I'm ready to add 3. So I'm going to go ahead and do the 3 silver. And they are sitting right in between those 2. And now there's plenty of space there. It feels much more comfortable. I bring this in underneath. I pull the thread down, and I pass through those beads. And if it kind of comes undone, don't worry. See how it all loosened up on me here? Don't worry about it, because as you tighten, it's all going to pull back together again, like so. And it is possible to pull tighter on one side than the other, and so sometimes this will shift a little bit, so just pay attention for that. Like I said, because this thread that we're using is just wrapped around the leather, we actually can do a little bit of shifting. So if you need to, if one side is starting to get longer than the other, you can shift this around a little bit, kind of do a little wiggle dance here, and get it to be so that it'll be nice and straight. Okay. It's a very forgiving project. All right, so now I'm going to start pattern. So let's go with the dark purple. And we're putting them in place, going under that cord, bringing this thread down to kind of hold it, passing through those beads, and then pulling on the other side. And pulling nice and tight to make sure that we're making sure that there's no extra thread showing over here. So you're just going to keep doing this over and over and over again. And honestly, once you get to this point, you're going to start getting a rhythm, and it's going to be a lot of fun to do this. I am so addicted already because it's kind of like looming, but without the loom. It's a little bit faster and easier. And of course, I'm just doing stripes here, but there's no reason why you couldn't do a more elaborate pattern. Like I said, I will have some more elaborate patterns that are available at jillwisemandesigns.com. There's also a handout for this particular project that will walk you through everything that you need for it, all the steps that you go through. So there is always a written handout for these projects. And it's a PDF download that you can also get for free at jillwisemandesigns.com. All right, so here I am just working along and having a blast. So work on your length here, work on getting it established and work on your length. And when we come back, I'm going to show you how to finish the whole thing off. We're also going to talk a little bit about sizing then too. I stopped and made a little teeny tiny bracelet, but let me tell you, I didn't want to stop because I really do love the rhythm of this. I'm truly addicted on this. Just you wait. So we're making a little teeny tiny Barbie bracelet, and I've already tapered down the end, and I'm going to show you how to finish off that end. I want to bring you in a little bit closer so we can talk about sizing. Sizing is always an issue, right? So I wanted to show you that on this particular bracelet, what I did is I measured my own wrist, and you know I've got those fluffy wrists. So my wrist is just under 8 inches. So let's say 7 1/4 inches. I'm sorry, it's 7 3/4. So I basically usually wear around an 8 inch, maybe an 8 1/4 inch bracelet. So what I did here is when I had the bracelet on the board here, I measured from the button itself, because that's going to be part of what's going around your wrist, from the button down. And I had to take into account that I was going to have that little taper. That's about 1/4 inch, right? And then you're going to have the knots. And so the knot itself, depending on how tight of a knotter you are, that was about another 1/4 inch right there. So I basically stopped at 8 inches and let the section here where I created the buttonhole opening, that is the looseness around my piece. So let me kind of show you that here. If I start at the button, basically at the center of that button, and then I measure down, you can see that the knot ended up right at 8 inches for me. And so I just basically when I got to 7 1/2 inches, I knew that that extra 1/2 inch was going to be taken up by the taper down and the first knot of my closure. And then my looseness is going to be right here in the clasp area. Okay, so that's what you want to do, is if you're just going to taper to a 3, that'll be about a 1/2 inch that you need to allot for right there. So in this case, we're making about a 2-inch bracelet for Barbie. And I've already gone ahead and done the taper down. And so the only thing that you do differently with the taper down is as you are putting in the 2 and then the single is you're kind of pulling a little tighter because you're bringing the 2 pieces of leather in centered. And so you do want to make sure that you don't pull off to the side so that one piece of leather is longer than the other. As much as possible. I mean, it's, you know, it's at the clasp area. It's not going to be a huge deal. So here I am. I finished with my taper. Now what do I do to end off this thread? Well, remember how we did that figure 8 thing at the beginning? Okay, come on. Pick it up, Jill. There we go. We're going to do that here also. So basically the same thing that we've been doing with the beads, we're going to do just without beads. So it's just figure 8 back and forth. This helps bring those 2 pieces of leather together and secure it. And as we do that, we're kind of tightening down. I don't want to tighten so much that this buckles right here. So you'll notice that I keep kind of putting my fingers over it to make sure that none of these beads are buckling up. I want this to be nice and flat. So we're going to do that, you know, 4, 5, 6 times, however much wrap you like. It's kind of just a feeling on this. Some people like a lot of wrap. Some people just like a little wrap. I'm kind of a little wrap kind of gal. Okay, do this one more time. Ouch! Don't poke yourself in the finger with the needle unless you want to put a DNA signature on your piece. Okay, so there we go. I feel really comfortable about that wrap. Look how that's all come together really smoothly right there. So now I need to end off this thread, which means that we're just going to tie knots again. So at this point, I think the easiest thing to do is actually to cut off your needle, like so. Well, that can stay down there. And then I'm going to separate these 2 pieces that you have left. Kind of untangle them a little bit here, like so. I'm going to bring one underneath and one on top. And then we're going to tie these in a square knot. Actually, this would actually just be easier if these pieces were not this long. So let me trim them. There we go. Okay. So right over left and tighten, making sure that it's going down where I want it to be. Then left over right, and that makes one square knot. The reason it is a square knot is a very secure knot is because you do take the time to alternate what comes first. It is important that you do the right over left and then the left over right. If you do everything the same way, it is not secure at all. It will come apart on you. All right, so then now we can take this off of our beading board here. And this is where we can undo our little piece of scrap. Like so. And we'll take this out of this, like so. What you can do with these tails, you know, you can put a dab, like I said, on that knot. You can put a little dab of glue there and just cut it off. We're bead weavers. If you're watching this channel, you're probably a bead weaver. And so if you are a bead weaver, there's no reason why you can't take these ends and weave them back and forth and end them off by weaving them back and forth through those beads. Just a thought. So you certainly can do it that way, or you can just trim them after you have put a dab of glue on there. So like I said, hypo cement is a good glue for it, or super glue, something that has a fine point on it so that you can get really in nice and close. On this particular kind of bracelet, I think you also would be fine using like a clear nail polish on it. And that's not something that I say very often, but on something like this, I think it would be okay. Then all we have to do is tie the knots for our closure. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this temporary knot out. Okay. And so my first knot for my closure, I want right at the end there where the cords came together. And let's see, right there. We'll get it on through. You have multiple chances at this with the leather, because you can unknot it and knot it again. So don't stress about this. This is just a simple overhand knot. And there we go. I turned it, ended up right in the beautiful spot. And then for the second knot for your closure, you want it a little bit bigger than the button. And so what I like to do is I like to kind of bring this up to the button and say, okay, right kind of here is where I want this second knot to be. And then I kind of put my finger there and start that knot before there. Bring it up through, tighten it down. And then before I get super tight, I want to test it. So let's bring that through and see how secure that feels. That is feeling pretty good. It could probably even get a little bit tighter, although it's gonna hold, because look, that's all the extra that's in there for closure. So you're actually pretty good. The only reason I'm thinking you might want it a little bit short on the shorter end or tighter end is because leather can stretch as you wear it. So if it's a little tight right at first, then as it stretches, it'll be perfect. So I think that's just perfect. I'm going to cut these ends off however much additional you want here. I actually like to cut them on a little bit of a diagonal right there, just a little added something. And then we're going to close this. And there is Barbie's gorgeous little bracelet. And like I said, we would just trim these extra threads off so that you don't have all that craziness going on. We're just going to pretend that I glued it. Don't tell Barbie that hers is substandard because I didn't actually glue it, because she'll get mad at me. And there we go. Hey, I guess that could be kind of a cute little ring, huh? Okay, maybe not. But in any case, that's how you finish it off. That is super easy. That's one of the things I love about it is the ending, the start and the beginning. You know how clasps are usually a problem? Not a problem with this one. I am completely addicted. I admit it. There's no 12-step program for this other than making 12 more of these bracelets. I think you're really going to enjoy making these. I actually, during one of the breaks, I told Brian, the director, I said, I think that the ladies are going to really go nuts on this one. And I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. So make sure you come show me in our group, Jill Wiseman Beaders in Facebook is a great place to meet with other Jill Wiseman Designs fanatics and see all of the projects that they make, from the kits and the patterns and the videos and the book and the whole shebang. So I hope you come join us and show us what you make too. Happy beading. Enjoy.